Oh, such a clutch off-season pickup, Dave.
I was worried we'd bring back the same team.
I meant those blackout motorized shades.
Blinds.com made it crazy affordable to replace our old blinds.
Hard to install?
No, it's easy. I installed these and then got some for my mom. She talked to a design consultant for free and scheduled a professional measure and install.
Hall of Fame son.
They're the #1 online retailer of custom window coverings in the world.
Blinds.com is the GOAT.
Shop Blinds.com right now and get up to 45% off select styles, plus a professional measure. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Welcome back to the Epic Universal Podcast. I'm entertainer writer Jim Hill, and this is the podcast where we cover the latest Universal news, rumors, and history. And as always, I'm joined by Eric Hersey. One problem, though, folks, we are recording this show on January 21st, which, again, that's 10 days ago?
Yeah, Jim, it's all the same to me.
so with our voice from the distance past, and the reason that's a problem is that last week is when we got the Academy Award nominations announced, and I think we were pre-gaming largely on the back of you mentioning the number of times that your lovely bride Lauren and your daughter Lainey have watched Wicked at home now.
Hey Jim, they're watching it right now, and I don't care if it's the future or active right now. They're still watching it. So
okay.
It's the 21st, which they are. I'm sure on the 31st they're watching it as well.
Okay, so the smart money seems to be on. What is it that? It just passed $700 million at the worldwide box office. The belief is this is going to do well come award season. But it's going to be interesting to see, is it strictly for technical awards or obviously costumes, set design, that sort of thing. But it'll also be interesting to see if any of the performers get recognized.
Yeah, I think that is going to be interesting. And one of the interesting, the costume is great. And we got to see that when we were in Orlando.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
And it didn't, and no matter what, if there was a bar or not, the running joke at our house is Go-Go, which is our, the grandma. She touched everything. She so we watch the movie and Lainey will say, "Oh, Go-Go touched that. Oh, Go-Go touched that," which is really funny in our case. Don't tell Universal, just you didn't hear that.
Okay.
The grandma didn't touch anything. Your stanchions were perfectly capable of keeping us all away.
Okay.
But I think the Wicked fever is still there. I don't pay too much attention to the movies and who wins what, but it was critically acclaimed, at least received 88% on like Rotten Tomatoes and a 95% audience score. And the article I was reading from Collider praised it as like one of the best movies of the year. Now I know that doesn't always translate.
Okay.
There's people can love movies and the critics don't necessarily always care, but I feel like this one was well done in many ways.
Well, and the irony here is, in fact, Stephen Schwartz was just pointing out, he was the composer of the songs for Wicked, that if you go back to when the show actually opened on Broadway in 2003, I want to say, the reviews weren't all that enthusiastic. It's just sort of like, yeah, Wizard of Oz, great. And it was one of these things where the audience found it and the audience loved it. So it's kind of interesting to 21 years later, the critics are, okay, all right, maybe we got it wrong. Maybe this is good. So,
well, it was a beautiful made movie. I think Lauren told me over and over that like a lot of the sets were actually real things. Like there wasn't not a lot of CG. Now I always question her. Every time I watch it now, I'm kind of facetious and I'm like, so you're telling me that wasn't CG? That's a real, and we know there's lots of CG. And I'm like, hold on, that bear really was there. I said, they trained that bear for months and months to deliver that baby.
Okay. That may be. But on the other hand, to give John Chu, the director, credit, he recognized that this was going to have to sit alongside the 1939 Wizard of Oz, which a lot of that was done practically. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's some amazing mats and miniatures in that film. But just the notion was, because, like it or not, if you're an Oz movie, you're going to be compared to the Judy Garland film from 39. Right. They made that decision going in, and it made it that much more expensive. But it seems to have delivered the goods. And speaking of which, have we talked yet about how we now know what it's not Wicked Part 2, it actually has a subtitle for good.
For good. Yeah, I don't know if we talked about it, but I do know like the OCD clan, like myself out on the internet, are all like, well, now it's going to say on the titles, one's going to say part 1 and the next one won't say part 2. And we're like up in arms of like, no, how dare you? But I even think the director was like, isn't it better to have this title?
Yeah. So again, it'll be interesting giving our archival world. It's like, that's what you told me the title is. And I know archivists being who they are, it's like Wicked Part 1, Wicked Part 2 for good. So, all right.
Well, we got our Wicked talk out of the way for now. I think
there we go.
Before we move on to the rest of the show, I think it's a good time that we thank our sponsors.
This is true. And we have a brand new sponsor, by the way, Be Our Guest Vacations. And planning your next getaway? Let Be Our Guest Vacations handle the details. As a platinum level earmarked travel agency, they specialize in providing concierge level service to trips to Universal Orlando, Hollywood, the Disney parks, cruises, and so much more. And the Be Our Guest Vacation team, they take the stress out of planning. So all you need to do is enjoy an epic vacation. So visit beourguestvacations.com today to get started. And don't forget to tell them that the Epic Universal podcast sent you. All right. So we were just talking about Wicked. And again, it's made $700 million worldwide. A good chunk of that was stateside, 465 million in ticket sales in North America. Going to be interesting to see if they break the 500 million domestic, because as you were mentioning, it's now available on demand, right?
Digital and so and I think that's kind of impressive. They got there before even the digital came out, but now you can watch it over and over and over, and they do. They do.
On the other hand, Universal's thrilled with that. On the other hand, how Wolfman did this past.
That's what I wanted to ask you about this Wolfman, because I mean I didn't get to see it, and I told you when we talked about it a couple weeks ago that like this isn't my genre. This is not my. But it didn't do so well, or is that what you're hearing?
Well, the interesting part of this situation is that we're talking about the box office for this film over the long Martin Luther King Day weekend, which, by the way, worth pointing out, it was the second lowest gross for that particular window in the ticket buying year in more than a decade. In fact, I want to say it was Mufasa, which had been in theaters for 4 weeks at that point, that came in at number 1. And then I think behind that was Sonic 3. But what's interesting talking with the folks at Universal is they're like, well, look, we had kind of one hand tied behind our back anyway, because Wolfman was rated R.
Yeah.
And that's because this Wolfman spent a lot of time chewing on things. And so they couldn't cut their way around that. It was going to be an R-rated movie, and that was going to hobble it. And director Lee Wannell, who had done The Invisible Man for Universal previously, it was one of these things where it's like, I did what I could with this film. And by the way, it didn't cost an awful lot to make, total of $25 million. So if it does halfway decent overseas, this will be a film that recovers its production and promotion costs easy. It will live on cable and streaming.
Yeah, it'll probably make it on, what is it? Is not Max, but maybe Peacock. If it's Universal. So I mean, it can have legs. I mean, and it wasn't like it was not. I mean, it wasn't necessarily the greatest from a Rotten Tomatoes score. I think it scored like 54. So it had mixed reviews. So some people probably love it, and then there's some people like me that's just not their cup of tea. So they didn't go see. But it's one of those things. It is a monster movie, right? Kind of. It's Wolfman, so it kind of falls within that, like the latest Mummy and the Invisible Man kind of stuff. So as long as it didn't like horribly bomb, it doesn't really derail potential future movies, right?
Oh no, not at all. But on the other hand, what's fascinating is to to hear people talking about this movie, and I'm just going to put two words out here: bear trap. And what happens when an animal gets its foot caught in a trap? Which again, just if you're lining up your viewing for the night, and maybe I should take a look at Wolfman. Just remember these two words: bear trap. Okay, then maybe
Jim, I think next time they should think of Frankenstein because it worked before. Wolfman, Frankenstein.
There we go. All right, now moving on to lighter, happier material. We saw something interesting get rolled out at Universal Studios Florida this past week or so. Well, let's first talk about the musical component of this.
Yeah, this is where I get I appreciate those that have the time to do this. So I'll give WDWNT.com. They went through and gave a full list. They changed Universal Studios Florida debuted a new music entrance loop, which is just great because I love this kind of nerd stuff where somebody sat down and listened and listed all of the music loop and then listed what the new one had. So this is the best use of AI I used. I said copy and paste. I said show me what's new, show me what's old, and then kind of figured out. But it was interesting that the new music loop, they removed some of like the nostalgia soundtracks like Apollo 13, Beetlejuice, and which I didn't even know that those were on there. But then they started adding, which makes a lot of sense, Despicable Me, Kung Fu Panda, Harry Potter. So
yeah, I get it from a promotional branding point of view. That makes sense. But on the other hand, I always did love you're walking up Production Central and the boom, 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 the Beetlejuice music. Or again, Apollo 13, really sweeping score. And things have to change. They obviously, they do. And toward that end, what did you think of the new signage that's debuted at the Universal?
Yeah. Well, I think friend of the show, Buy Reconstruct, sent some nice digital signs. Now I get confused because I didn't drive a lot around property, and I was in a bus most of the time. And with that, I'm trying to hold up a stroller or try to make sure I don't fall because I'm normally not the one sitting. So I get confused on where these signs are. So next time I go there, I'm like, all right, where am I seeing these? But they're really nice. They're digital signs. And I even saw one for the new Stella Nova or the Terra Luna Resort and had Stargaze and stuff. But where are these signs, Jim? They've just throughout the park?
Well, they are at the various entrance points. I mean, for example, when you come in the main entrance off of Major, I want to say. I mean, I'm dating myself. I literally, once upon a time in the 1990s, lived in a condo complex that was 3/4 of a mile away from the entrance of Universal. So I'm using all of the road names from the 90s, and that's not good. But yeah, they are at those entry points. And what's interesting for me is seeing the video component along with the classic signage and the understanding that, okay, we're looking at what they're using this for now. But when you think about Halloween Horror Night, when you think about Grinchmas, that sort of thing, the potential to do some really spectacular things with these signs. Can't wait going forward here to see what the folks in Universal do with that.
Yeah, that's tremendous.
Okay, but again, with the opening of new things comes the closing of old things, and so we just lost the on-location gift shop. Is that right?
Yeah. So I did witness this when and went there. I mean, it wasn't obviously like it's not the A-list attraction or E-list or whatever, but it is a nice little shop that just closed down, and not sure what they're necessarily putting there. I guess there's Studio Suites is rumored to be relocating to this space, but this is where you had like your photo pickup location.
Yep.
Which I didn't use my Universal photos the 2 times we went there, so I'm not too familiar on how that all works. But at the end of the day, that closed up, and if you like the on location gift shop, sorry, you no longer have a chance to go there.
Yeah. What's interesting to me is when you look at the items that were previously available, their hats, sunglasses, sun care projects. I mean, this is literally classic Disney theme park. This thing was on the right as you entered, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's exactly. It's like, oh, crud, it's hot, or it's bright. I need a hat or sunglasses or SPF 35. but more to the point, the fact that used to be a photo pickup location, and face it, we're all looking at our phones now. Nobody's picking up this. So
well, that's my first trip. I mean, this would be the time where I would have bought that like photo pass thing, and I'm like, we'll be fine. We'll take the pictures. We have grandma here; she'll take the picture of our family for us. So I could see where that no longer is an option.
Okay, so that's happening in 2025, and you want to pour one out for the on location store? Feel free. On the other hand, if we look ahead to 2026. Universal's kind of shuffled up the deck, where we were previously getting Shrek 5 in, what was it, late June?
Shrek, yeah. It was going to be like summer, right?
Right. That's since shifted back 6 months or so. It now has a brand new release date, December 23rd. And to fill that now open spot on Universal's dance card, Minions 3, which previously was coming out in 2027, now takes a great leap forward, a full year, and that's opening next July in 2026. And Mr. Taylor and I were talking about this over on Fine Tuning, and he was like, I'm going to get on the phone to friends at Illuminations and ask them about how they feel about, because he mentioned that when this sort of thing happens, like, for example, when Brad Bird found out that, oh, by the way, Incredibles 2, we need that a full year earlier. And is that going to be a problem? And the other thing that's a little fascinating about this is there's a second title out there for this Minions movie. It's called Mega Minions. So which suggests that the superhero characters that were introduced in Despicable Me 4 might be coming back. But I'm so sorry for the folks at Illuminations who now have begun sleeping under their desks to make that deadline. But
I was going to say, let's send them coffee, lots of Keurigs and K-Cups.
There we go.
You'll get this done. But it's pretty interesting. I don't know how often this happens. Like I said, you've been covering movies for quite some time, where I've been paying attention since January of last year of movie dates. So I don't know if this happens frequently, but it seems like 6 months of a jump ahead or back. One was either running behind, one is ahead, or they just like one staff better than the other.
The other thing that's kind of interesting about this is that Eddie Murphy has talked about this project, but also makes up a point of bringing up that in much the same case as Puss in Boots got a spin-off film. In fact, 2. We got the Last Wish year before last, which, by the way, I think is a really good film.
Jim, funny thing is, my son Hunter, he's 18. He trolls us all the time by saying we need to watch Puss in Boots. And everybody in the house kind of groaned because he was pushing it so much. This last Saturday, we actually watched it as a family, and I really, really enjoyed it. I thought Puss in Boots, and I never saw the first one, so it was just kind of going in, and I'm like, these characters, but I like the villain, I like the story, I liked it all. So I liked it.
And who would have thought? I mean, actually, one of the most satisfying story arcs in that entire thing is the Goldilocks story.
I loved it. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. So it was great. So I'm glad my son trolled us all and forced us to watch it. So.
Yeah. All right. Well, anyway, speaking of animation, when we get back from this break, we're going to talk about how the Munsters, once upon a time, started off life as maybe an animated TV show, and then things went another way. But first, this.
Flex your business with an American Express Business Gold Card. You'll earn 4 times membership rewards points on your top 2 eligible spending categories, like transit and electronics, each month, on up to $150K in combined purchases per year. Plus, you can now earn 3 times membership rewards points on flights and prepaid hotels booked on AmexTravel.com. Terms and points cap apply. Learn more at americanexpress.com/business-gold. Amex Business Gold, built for business by American Express.
This episode is brought to you by Intuit TurboTax. Didn't file with TurboTax last year? That's in the past. Now, Taxes is getting the TurboTax app and filing your own taxes for free if you didn't file with them last year. File by February 18th. All tax forms, all 100% free. Now, this is taxes. Intuit TurboTax. New filers and filers who didn't use TurboTax last year only must start and file your own taxes in-app by February 18th. Excludes TurboTax Live. Full terms at TurboTax.com.
I think you're on mute.
Workday starting to sound the same?
I think you're on mute.
Find something that sounds better for your career on LinkedIn. With LinkedIn Job Collections, you can browse curated collections by relevant industries and benefits, like flex PTO or hybrid workplaces, so you can find the right job for you. Get started at linkedin.com/jobs. Finding where you fit. LinkedIn knows how.
And we're back. Okay, so, folks, this is a follow-up to the feature story that we started on last week's Epic Universal. By the way, listener Tito suggested this story. So, picking up where we left off last week, Alan Burns and Chris Hayward, who were the head writers of the Bullwinkle Show, they had gone to Universal executives with their idea for a brand new animated series for television. This was going to be called Love Thy Monster, which is going to be a riff on the old Amelie, Love Thy Mother, and was supposed to talk about this family of monsters that lived out in the suburbs. That said, Eric, one tiny little problem. As Alan Burns mentioned in an interview years later, after the Munsters first aired on CBS, we kind of stole the idea for our show from the cartoons that Charles Addams had done for the New Yorker. So when MGM announced that they were now going to turn those same cartoons into a live-action sitcom for ABC, well, that should have sank our show idea at Universal. But here's the interesting part, Eric. It didn't. Largely because Universal Studios saw what MGM was planning on doing and thought, well, we have our classic monsters. Maybe we could do something like that too. Maybe a live action sitcom where the monsters live in the suburbs. How hard could that be? All right. So they take Burns and Hayward's initial premise, and first thing, they toss out all the characters that were clearly lifted from Charles Addams' New Yorker cartoons, and then they insert Universal's version of Frankenstein monster and Dracula. But now it's like, all right, so who do we get to play these two roles? And now remember, this story starts in mid-1963, and in April of that same year, 63, Car 54, Where Are You? Had just finished its 2-season run over at NBC, and two of the stars of this Emmy Award-winning series were Fred Gwynne, who played New York police officer Francis Muldoon, and Al Lewis, who played Desk Sergeant Leo Schnauzer.
Hold on. So real quick. So I know where this is going, because that's the Munsters guys, right?
That's the Munsters guys.
And they were in another show playing apart from each other. And it was like a cop show?
It was a cop show, but
right,
they were also really funny in the cop show. And again, all right, now, crucial part. You have two performers that the TV audience is already familiar with. And now you got to factor in that Fred Gwynne is 6 feet 5 inches tall. So
he's big, yeah.
All right, makes him a strong candidate to play Herman Munster. And Al Lewis, who's just a little short, round comic performer who came up through vaudeville and burlesque, he's already established that he works well with Fred, and he's a good visual contrast to Gwynne. So, seeing as MGM's Addams Family sitcom already had a head start on the Munsters, team at Universal knew they had to work fast. So they literally got to Fred Gwynne and Al Lewis. It's like, hi, would you like a job? And so by February of 64, they're on board. And they're like, all right, we got to get moving here, guys. So they shoot a 16-minute long presentation of this proposed sitcom. Now, mind you, that's not a full-length pilot. Typically, back in the day, if you were going to be doing a half-hour-long sitcom, you had to prep a pilot that was at least 25 minutes long. Again, allowing for commercial time, that sort of thing. And this will be what you'd bring to CBS. But again, knowing that MGM is prepping a live action Addams Family for ABC, they got to move. So they shoot this 16-minute long thing. They send it to CBS. Now, what's interesting is it was shot in color, and all of the classic Universal monster themed characters, their makeup has this blue-green tint.
Okay.
All right. So, and of course, CBS shows this to test audiences, and they're like, what's with the blue-green skin? It's like, ooh, they look gross. But the folks at CBS, I mean, they see the potential, but now there's this internal debate. It's like, well, seeing live people with blue-green skin is kind of putting them off. So maybe we really should do this as an animated series. But there are executives at CBS where it's like, no, guys, we are in competition with the Addams Family, and that's going to be ready to drop for the start of the fall television season, September of 64. If we do this as animation, that's more expensive. That's more time consuming. The earliest we'd have this show ready would be January of 65. And now we're the second horror themed thing, the comedy sitcom. And now we're going to look like a copycat. We want, if possible, to open day and date with Addams Family. And in fact, what's interesting, Eric, they actually almost managed to do it. Addams Family debuted on ABC September 18th, 1964, whereas the Munsters was able to premiere on CBS just 6 days later.
Wow.
On September 24th, 64.
So you really couldn't tell who was new. I mean, if you were thinking about it, it wasn't much of a copycat because you knew they were both being produced at the same time. So you could always point back and say, no, we created first. And they'll say, no, we created first. And no one would know because it's done 6 days later.
There we go. But accepting that, it's like, all right, we can't do the animated version. But as a fix to the whole their skin is blue and green, they decide, okay, we're going to shoot the Munsters in black and white. Which, again, it's like, hey, they're the classic Universal monsters, and that all those movies were shot in black and white.
That makes sense, right? Yeah, I you get behind that.
But now the poor Universal executives they're just trying to seal the deal with CBS. Just get this thing officially greenlit. But now come all of these notes from CBS executives. And they wind up shooting 3 full-length pilots for the Munsters before CBS finally officially says, okay, yes, we'll do that show. So, for example, for the 3rd pilot of the show, they actually said you got to get a different actress for Herman's wife. So that's how Yvonne DiCarlo, she's brought in to replace a great comic actress called Joan Marshall. And by the way, the CBS was also, we don't like the name Phoebe. Come up with a different name. So that's how she became Lily Munster. Now, on the other hand, if we jump ahead to the 4th pilot for the Munsters, Butch Patrick, who was actually hired to replace the first actor who played Eddie Munster, a kid called Nate Happy Durman, and I bet he wasn't happy when he got fired.
No.
But going into shooting the 4th pilot, the director pulls Butch aside and says, God, you can't be a brat in this one. You got to be a sweet kid. All right. Play everything cute and gentle and don't be a jerk. And then to finally seal the deal. And this tells you how desperate Universal is at this point to what's it going to take to make you say yes. And what Universal does is they agree to bring in Joe Connolly and Bob Mosher. Now, these are the guys who created Leave It to Beaver. All right.
Right.
So if you're going down the list of producers like the Munsters, who should we get? Who would be good for this? The Leave It to Beaver people.
Kind of how the show ended up, right? I mean, it seemed like a Leave It to Beaver kind of vibe.
Well, that's the interesting. So many of the episodes are Herman sitting down with Eddie. And
right.
Don't bite the neighbor's kids. But anyway, so that's what finally seals the deal. And they officially announce, come the fall of 1964, Munsters is debuting as part of the primetime lineup on CBS, just as the Addams Family would be debuting on ABC. So what could possibly go wrong there? All right. So, all right. And we'll discuss what happened after this break. And we're back. And because this is the Epic Universal podcast, and we've talked at length about what just happened out in Hollywood this past year, celebrating the 60th anniversary of the Tram Tour. It's interesting, Eric, to point out that the Munsters was just getting underway production-wise on the Universal lot, just as the Tram Tour began running as an attraction in July of 1964. And, well, and because Universal really, really needed the Munsters to be a hit TV show, first of all, the tram drivers that summer would make a point of driving by 1313 Mockingbird Lane and then pointing out the exterior of the Munsters show, which, by the way, if you're a fan of Desperate Housewives, that house cleans up nice because it's one of the houses.
Are you serious?
It's one of the houses in Desperate Housewives.
Okay. I'm gonna do a side by side. I'm gonna go to Google a little later.
Cool. All right, but then the trams would actually linger outside of sound stages 30 and 32 on the lower lot, and this is where the interiors where the Munsters were shot. And again, we mentioned earlier in the show Fred Gwynne and Al Lewis, who after their stint on Car 54, Where Are You?, knew how the TV game was played and that understood how important it was to engage with the fans of your TV show. These guys would actually, if they weren't shooting at that time, would step outside in full costume and makeup and walk up to the tram and go down and go, by the way, we're on CBS on Thursday night starting at 7:30. Be sure and watch us. How cool would that have been?
That's like the original Johnny Depp on Pirates, right? Like it's the original. Yeah, that's a great publicity stunt, but they were doing it because they're like, we need this show to succeed.
And Al and Fred were totally on board with this. They did everything they could to turn the Munsters into a hit show. In fact, they drove the Munster Mobile on an absolutely frigid November day along the entire parade route of Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade in 1964. Again, just to get their TV show some additional free publicity. And again, they're in full makeup and costume. So, and by the way, another really weird little bend on the story, but just have to bring this up because, again, we were mentioning animation top of the show. 64 again was the year everybody in television recognized this was strange. The two horror film sitcoms were debuting on network television, but who actually finds a fun way to comment on it? The Flintstones. 5th season of the show on ABC. They decide, okay, we're going to riff on it. So, and in fact, you can go and check this episode out. It aired on November 12th of that year, 1964. This is when Fred and Barney meet the Gruesomes, who are this group of monsters who move in just down the street from the Flintstones. And have you ever seen any of these characters?
Jim, funny story is the last time we were actually in Orlando, like I don't know, when you have cable and not streaming, I always throw on a show and I throw Boomerang on, which is the old cartoon. And this actually was playing on our last trip when we were in Orlando, staying at a hotel, and I watched it and I said, what is going on? Like, it is obviously a riff on the Munsters in a sense.
It is. And the weird part of it is it was supposed to be a one-off, but it was so popular, they actually brought the Gruesomes back for a couple of episodes. So, again, all right. Anyway, back to the Munsters now. And again, cast of the show determined what to do, whatever they have to get the TV viewing audience to connect with the show. So they even agree to appear in a Marineland Carnival.
I don't even know what that is.
Oh, God. You can go to YouTube right now. This is an Easter special that aired on CBS April 18th, 1965. And the premise is the Munsters have journeyed down to Marineland of the Pacific, and this is an oceanarium. That's for lack of a better term, an ocean-themed theme park. Okay. That was located on the Southern California coast on the Palos Verdes Peninsula. Now, it's interesting you mentioned Pirates, Johnny Depp, just a moment ago, because Marine Land of the Pacific actually closed in February of '87, got leveled. But on the other hand, if you've watched any of the first three Pirates of the Caribbean movies, you know the scenes when it's set on the fort and there's that amazing view of the ocean?
Oh, yeah.
For example, in the first film, when this is the time you almost captured Captain Jack Sparrow.
Yeah.
He falls off. That's filmed on the site of the old Marine Land of the Pacific. Yeah. But anyway, you can watch, like I said, Marine Land Carnival over on YouTube. And again, it's in grainy black and white. I apologize for that, but it is worth it alone for the moment where you have poor Fred Gwynn again in his full Herman Munsters outfit with his built-up shoes, but it's him out on the edge of the dolphin feeding pool, like 20 feet off the ground, getting dolphins to jump out of the water for food, and it is great. But anyway, all of this extra promotional effort pays off, at least for the first season of the Munsters. This horror-themed sitcom actually did better in the ratings than the Addams Family. Munsters in season 1 actually tied with Gilligan's Island, which also aired on CBS, by the way, for the 18th spot overall for the year, where Addams Family peaked at 23. Sadly, though, Eric, this all, and Munsters and the Addams Family came crashing down in their second season when both of these shows found themselves dealing with Batman, the Adam West show.
Oh, okay.
Which debuted on ABC back in January of '66 and just became this white-hot pop culture phenomena.
You can't fight against Batman. But I mean, Batman...
And that's the thing. That's it exactly. Both of these horror film sitcoms found themselves being canceled in the spring of '66.
Wow, canceled like that bad.
But here's the interesting part. As Universal is telling the cast of the Munsters TV series that, I'm sorry, the show's been canceled, they're like, no, wait a minute. Don't clean out your dressing rooms just yet. We're not going to shoot a Munsters movie. And it's like, what?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, but here's the thing. After 2 seasons on CBS, there are now 70 episodes of The Munsters in the can. And that's more than enough for you to syndicate the show.
Oh, yeah.
But on the other hand, The Munsters has yet to air overseas. And syndication is turning out to be a very lucrative component of Universal's television production, that arm of the company. And especially when it comes to selling TV series that have originally aired in America in now dubbed versions that can then play on television networks in different countries. So they want to do this with the Munsters. But the thinking up in the Black Tower is that in order to make a big splash over in Europe and Asia out ahead of then making the television syndication rights available to the Munsters in those same markets, what Universal needs to do is a full-length Munsters movie, which they can then release internationally, and only then, go like, hey, I like that movie. We got 70 episodes here. You sign up for a syndication deal.
Right, yeah.
So, anyway, this movie called Munsters Go Home is shot in the summer of *65 after production of the second season of The Munsters wraps. It's then released in Europe in the late winter, early spring of '66, and it also gets released in stateside theaters June of that same year, '66, and turned out, Eric, very smart play on Universal's part. The Munsters TV series debuts in syndication fall of '66. Immediately becomes its enormous success, never stops playing in reruns. In fact, it's so popular that 15 years later, the cast of this show, and we're talking, again, Fred Gwynn, Al Lewis, Yvonne DiCarlo, they come back and shoot a reunion TV movie, The Munsters Revenge, which airs on NBC in February of '81.
15 years later, they got together and released that. I mean, at this point in time, I've seen the Munsters. Like I know it more so than the original Addams Family shows. So yes, I think it lived on in syndication almost greater, to the point where I know exactly what you're talking about, and I almost feel like I saw one of these movies before.
Yeah, well, but what's interesting is that again, Universal executives on the television side are looking at still doing well in syndication. In October of '88, they're like, "Oh, what the hell?" And they revived the show. We get the Munsters today, which is made strictly for syndication. Now, mind you, it's an entirely new cast and largely unseen today, at least.
I was going to say, I don't know this at all.
But the weird part of it is this show actually runs longer than the original. It gets 3 seasons rather than 2, and actually they get 7. They produce 72 episodes total, beating the original series by 2 additional episodes. And then in 1995, there's another TV movie called Here Come the Munsters, which actually airs on Fox in Halloween of that year, and it tells the origin story, so to speak, how Herman and his family traveled from Transylvania and wound up in the United States, and that weirdly does well enough that Fox orders a follow-up film. So we get the Munsters' Scary Little Christmas, which airs.
We got a Christmas movie.
We got a Christmas movie.
I'm adding that to the playlist. We're watching it next year for sure.
Okay, but here's something maybe you don't want to put on the playlist: Mockingbird Lane. This was done by Brian Fuller, the gentleman behind critically acclaimed show Pushing Daisies. And it was actually a Munsters inspired dramedy, hour-long show.
Okay.
Fuller made it with Universal in 2012, and NBC initially said, yes, absolutely. Well, we want that show. And then they saw the pilot and it's like, yeah, no. We've seen Herman and Lily and Grandpa. This isn't Herman, Lily, and Grandpa. I don't think there's an audience for this show. Though, that said, for Halloween of 2012, NBC did air the pilot, and I saw it, and it was, I want to say it was Eddie Izzard as Grandpa.
Okay.
It's a little weird. But on the other hand, compared to Rob Zombie's Munsters movie, which Universal Home Entertainment released back in September of 2022, that makes Mockingbird Lane look like Gone with the Wind. So, and then somewhere in the middle there, October of '73, there was the Mini Munsters, an hour-long animated thing that ran as part of ABC's Saturday morning superstar movie, which, bringing this thing full circle, given that the Munsters way back in '63 started off as a pitch that Alan Burns and Chris Hayward did for Love Thy Monster. It's kind of appropriate. We finally got to see Herman and Grandpa as animated characters. But anyway, thanks again to Tito for suggesting the story idea. And Eric, if I were a betting man, even on the heels of Rob Zombie's Munsters movie, I would bet that we have yet to see the last of Herman and Grandpa and Lily, because as the Universal classic Monsters movies have proved over and over and over again, you can't keep a good monster down. You can put him in quicksand. You can burn down the windmill he's in. You can have him blow up the mad scientist lab. He's still back in a year. All right.
Well, maybe they'll show up over in Epic.
There we go.
Meet him at the pub.
There we go.
Then we see a little Eddie Munster. No, that's very interesting. Did they do, what was the gentleman from Raymond, that the gentleman with the deep voice? Did he do a Herman Munster at some point in time?
Brad Garrett. He would have been perfect. In fact, the interesting thing is that when Mel Brooks did the musical version of Young Frankenstein, evidently that's who they went after. They so wanted Brad Garrett to come to New York to be Frankenstein's monster, and they just could never come to terms He would have been lovely. He would have been. But yeah, I mean, what's interesting is if you actually go back to the Here Come the Munsters movie, they got Edward Herrmann, who, if you you know the Gilmore Girls, is the patriarch of the Gilmore family.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But the fun thing is Edward Herrmann committed. He did this lovely Fred Gwynn impression, just sort of like, really leaned into what Fred did with Herman. So,
oh man, well, the best part about some of these shows, Jim, is you give us my watch list grows every single week, whether it be on YouTube or having to seek out where I can find some of these. So, learning some new things, and I always enjoyed the Munsters, and I always thought that it was. I mean, out of the two, I thought the Munsters was better than the Addams Family. So I think I'll give it a go, and for those who want to watch along with me, maybe I'll live tweet one of the movies.
Cool. Okay. And again, just to bring it back to the tram tour, even today, though the house has changed locations multiple times, when you take the tram tour, they do, even today, 60 years later, make a point of pointing out, and that's where Herman and Lily and Grandpa lived.
That's awesome. Well, we'll have to see it when we go out there.
Okay.
All right, Jim, that was thank you for that feature. Great show, as always.
No. I enjoyed it, and thanks again to Tito for suggesting it. So, as we bring things to a close here, Eric, where can the nice folks find you on social media?
Hey, you can find me pretty much on everywhere the social is at Eric Hersey. And Jim, what about you?
Let's see. I'm on X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it. Likewise, Instagram is Jim Hill Media, and then over on Facebook as Jim Hill Media News. And okay, folks, that is going to wrap things up for this week's edition of the Epic Universal Podcast. On behalf of Mr. Hersey, I want to thank you for listening, and please stick around now to hear what's coming up this month on the Jim Hill Media Podcast Network. Thanks for listening to today's episode, and if you like what you heard, head on over to Apple Podcasts and give us a review. This really helps get the word out about our shows. We also have some other shows on the network that you might like. Each week, we drop a brand new Disney dish with Len Testa. For animation and movie news, please listen to Fine Tuning with Drew Taylor. By the way, you can also check out Drew's other podcast, Light the Fuse, the official Mission Impossible podcast, which he does with Charles Hood. For all things Lucasfilm, why don't you subscribe to Looking at Lucasfilm with Brian Gahn? Likewise, we have I Want That Too with the lovely Lauren Hersey, our weekly podcast that features the latest merch and the stories behind that merch. And our Epic Universal Podcast takes a look at the Universal theme park. So please join Eric Hersey and I on that weekly. If you enjoy theme park history, we also host Manufacturing the Magic with Shelley and Noah Valladolid. That podcast tells the story of how we got the modern theme parks that we enjoy today. Join myself, Len Testa, and veteran Imagineer Jim Schul for our latest season of Disney Unpacked, our first ever video series exclusively for Patreon. These get released first Sunday of every month, and each month we release several exclusive podcasts to help support this video series. I want to thank everyone that supports the Jim Hill Media Network. For more information about podcast and content, head on over to jimhillmedia.com. So that's going to do it for now, folks. Thanks again for listening, and we will catch up on the next show.